It's a great day in America. Hi, I'm Andy Valdez with Marketing Dynamics here in Houston, Texas. And today is going to be episode 17, I think it is. And I'm labeling it Beauty and the Beast because my interviewee is Miss Mayra Leal. She is so beautiful and she's so smart and she's doing some awesome things. It's been a while since we've chatted, going back to, I think, 2007. So, hi, Mayra. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you? Thank you so much for having me with you today. So good to see you.
Well, before the Zoom call, we were, getting caught up. It's been such a while, and your life has changed so much. And so, just tell us a little bit about your background, and ultimately bring us up to speed to what you're doing today.
Oh man. Okay. Well, yeah, my background. Well, you met me when I was at the height of my quote unquote actress entertainment career. Back in, I believe, 2007. And I don't even know at this point. It's been a long time.
Right.
And yeah, I was pursuing an acting career for a very, very long time. And that sort of was my world for 13 years of my life. And you came into my life, and we were working together, I think briefly. And also meanwhile, during this time, I wasn't, I was pursuing this dream of mine, but I was also very much unwell in the mind and unwell emotionally. And so was, pursuing this thing by day, but then also really miserable and suffering by night. And so that's a little bit about that whole, I'd say that's really my background. I was acting. I was also in school at the time. I was getting a degree from the University of Houston in advertising and public relations, and pursuing the dream, moving from city to city, living in LA, going to Austin, moving to New Orleans. Just constantly chasing this thing, that I wanted to become, and also at the same time, not really well internally. And so then therefore I was self-sabotaging and getting myself into some really icky situations, and not making the best choices, and overusing drugs and alcohol, and overusing the partying thing to essentially numb my internal world, my internal wounding, struggles, etc. And so anyway, that's kind of at the time that you met me, though things appeared like, I was becoming successful. Internally, I wasn't well. And I had to hit several rock bottoms to essentially ask myself some deeper questions. And I was struck by grace. Through the grace of God, I was struck by grace and was given an opportunity to essentially change the course of my life. So, which is now my life has completely transformed, and I'm in a completely different place. I'm no longer pursuing acting. And that's not anything sad, or that period of my life I feel super complete with. And I really believe that I was meant to go through all of those challenging experiences that came with pursuing an entertainment career. It ultimately, all of those challenges ultimately shaped the human being that I am today. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's it.
Yeah. So, 2007, I was in marketing and went to one of the movie premieres and found out that you actually lived in Houston, and we wound up connecting. I think you were doing a Toys for Tots event, which benefits the Marine community. And I'm a Marine veteran, myself. And of course, I think your mother was making pupusas and you were selling them or something at a restaurant. And I didn't know what those were, but I learned to discover them, and they were very, very good. And I guess she still makes them. But interestingly, started helping you with your website and your fan base, because talent. You were very talented. Everybody wanted you in their movie. A lot of times, these independent filmmakers don't realize, that you got to get compensated for your work. So a lot of the independents, just want to get you involved in their project. And of course, as a professional, you want to attach to good productions that are going to leave a legacy, that kind of thing. But I remember getting a request from a Marine veteran in Afghanistan. You remember about he was in a combat zone and he wanted to take you to the Marine Corps ball. And I didn't know how I was going to navigate getting the Marines to approve something like that, because you read about some of these stories in the news where some actress, famous person gets invited to the ball, and that kind of thing. Well, there's a process. It didn't just happen, right? So thankfully, everything kind of materialized. It looked like, we got a limousine company step up and say, "Hey, I want to do limo service." And I think Chloe Dow wound up providing a fashion dress. And then
Oh yeah.
I think
Oh my gosh. Yes.
um,
Yeah.
Chef Walker from Brendan's was a Marine. He's a world renowned chef, and he provided a brunch, I think, and maybe a dinner or something to that effect. And so the Marine community just welcomed you. I mean, it was really incredible. They're still talking about it today. I was just mentioning before we went on a Zoom call. So what do you think about hanging around the Marines during the Marine Corps Ball here in Houston?
It was a lot of fun, and I'm super grateful. Truly, such an honor to have been given the opportunity to experience that. Truly, it's been a long, long time. It was in 2014. I was newly sober, so I do remember. It was one of my bigger parties I had gone to, in sobriety. And so, but, it all went well. And the gentleman I attended with was lovely and kind, and everybody was super loving and welcoming and caring and attentive. And yeah, it was a great experience. Thank you so much for putting all of that together.
Well, interestingly, I mean, God used you, because I wound up reconnecting with Sergeant Major Jimmy Sanchez. He just retired about 3 or 4 years ago. It turned out that he and I had gone to boot camp together. And
Oh,
so
wow.
when we were on the phone coordinating, he recommended the Marine of the Quarter to escort you to the ball. Since I guess the young man from Afghanistan, something happened to him, and not bad, but he couldn't make it. So I felt embarrassed, like, oh, we've got a damsel that is not being represented well, and I said we can't let her down. So ultimately Jimmy wound up getting us hooked up with the corporal here in Houston, and he graciously said, "Oh yeah, this will be an awesome thing." So again, it was to me, I didn't get to go to the ball, but it seemed like a fairy tale evening. And you even came out to the I think it was the DeBakey VA Center for the cake cutting ceremony, and that's a pomp
Right.
and circumstance, yeah, to meet some of the vets that are there at the hospital. So we really appreciated you supporting and being a part of that, and of course the work you were doing with Toys for Tots as well.
Yeah, thank you. That wasn't that I totally forgot about the cake cutting. It was awesome. Thank you for putting all of that together, and for, trusting me to be a part of such a beautiful event, and a meaningful one for all of these people involved. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Well, one day I think they'd like for you to come back. So the Marine Corps Ball is typically in November. So if you're ever back in Houston,
Anytime.
you let us know. But
Anytime.
what's that?
I said anytime.
And of course, being in your circle, so to speak, got to meet some of your family, and how they doing.
Family's doing great. My mother, she had a brain aneurysm like 8 years ago. And
Yeah, I
so
remember
she's
that.
still, she's still in a wheelchair, but she's a healthy, disabled woman. Thankfully she's healthy. And my dad is doing great. I just bought a 5-acre farm in Livingston, Texas, and they're over the moon about it. And I live in Indianapolis, and so they're taking care of the land, and buying animals. We have a donkey and 3 goats and 3 chickens, and um, dad's currently working on the fence there, and we're going to be building some tiny homes on the land here soon. And the intention behind this project is to, turn it into a little wellness farm, to share this beautiful, safe space with other humans that are in desire of unplugging and disconnecting from their busy lives. And I want to provide a peaceful environment, and cook yummy, healthy, nutritious meals, and also provide, movement and sound and breath. And yeah, so it's a really big vision, and it's going to maybe take some time, but yeah, parents are great. They're having a ball there. Um, it was so funny the other day. Our donkey, he unleashed himself and was running. And I was actually visiting Houston for a couple of days. And so I got to witness this. It was quite comical. So my dad, I could see, I'm washing dishes and I'm looking out the window and I see, this donkey running. And then my dad's following the donkey, trying to catch up to the donkey. And finally, my dad was able to grab onto the leash. And so he's like running with the donkey. And then the donkey, there's a tree in the way. And so my dad smashes into the tree, flies off the tree, and then is dragged by this donkey. I don't know how many feet. Finally, my dad lets go of the rope. And anyway, long story short, we captured the donkey. But it took some time and it definitely took some effort. And I ended up actually catching the donkey. It was funny. So, it's quite miraculous that I've been able to provide this beautiful space for myself and for my family, and it's bringing them a lot of joy, and that fills me up with so much joy knowing that I'm able to bring them some joy and some happiness into their lives. They're getting older, and I just love my parents so much. Like, I'll do anything for them.
Awesome. Well, just in talking, I mean, your posts and so forth, I mean, you really have embraced nature. And even, when I was a teenager, we used to go out a lot in the country, but, living life in the big city, you kind of lose that. So I think it's something that I want to incorporate into my future, making sure that I make time to get out to the wilderness or, places. I know we used to go to Colorado a lot when my mother lived in Denver, so you brought back some memories there. But you had made mention that, it's always good to see someone reinventing themselves. You can be pigeonholed into one certain thing, and that's not necessarily, that was you back then, and thankfully, I mean, you talk about recovery, and a lot of people don't ever get to recover, especially in the times that we're living with fentanyl and the other dangers. My wife and I, we made a commitment to stop drinking. I guess we're going on 6 months now. And we've just noticed that we have a lot more communication, less arguments, less downtime, more productivity, more clarity, and just enjoying, embracing life, and so thank you for sharing, your testimony. 'Cause when I was working with you, I didn't know really much about it per se, but then as you started to share, it was kind of exciting to me to see, like, wow, okay, now, things are going to be really good for her. Because I didn't, I can only imagine, just the turmoil and the problems that, people deal with without help, and we're getting, good guidance and good support, that kind of thing. So now that you're living this wonderful life, because we're talking about, you're doing yoga, you're cooking, we talked about reading books and the farming, but you are also, in a career. You graduated from college. I think I just found you did that years ago, but you finished your degree in advertising and whatnot. And you're doing a podcast, so you're doing so much.
So much. It's at times overwhelming, but it's quite amazing how capable we are of doing so many different things. When there's passion, motivation, and inspiration behind it, anything and everything is possible, I think. But, to take just a few steps back, yeah, sure, my life has completely transformed, and it is, quite beautiful and miraculous now. And when I first got sober, I thought that by eliminating drugs and alcohol, my life was going to flourish, and, my life was going to change immediately. And I was going to all of a sudden be the most joyful, most free, most happy. And while that was true for the first few months, because I was very much, just grateful for having made the change, pretty soon life started sort of happening again, and all of the wounding that I had numbed, and all of the traumas and all of the triggers, they still lied within me. All of those emotions that I had suppressed for years and years of my life, they were all still in my body. And emotions are energy in motion, essentially, and if we don't move them out, if we don't move them through, they stay stuck in our body. And so for many, many years in sobriety, I was still in a very, very dark place. It was actually like the first 4 years, I'd say, of my recovery path, I was not in a good place. And part of the reason was because I wasn't doing the work. I was still blaming people, places, and things outside of me for why my life wasn't the way that I thought it needed to be. It's because of that person or that thing or this job, or if only that person would give me an opportunity, or if only, XYZ thing. So very much victim mindset, very much looking outside of myself for why my life was where it was, instead of looking in the mirror and looking within. And so it wasn't until I began to look in the mirror and look within, and began changing my perspective, began changing my mind, began understanding myself at a far deeper level. When I started doing all of that, that's when essentially my life started to really transform. I love this quote, Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer he's no longer with us, but he was a spiritual teacher, and he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so I essentially began changing the way that I looked at things, through this process of digging deep within myself, and removing layer after layer after layer, of my being, and really, getting to the core of who I truly am. And that's, essentially my life began slowly transforming, and miracles started entering my life. I really believe that miracles are all around us, always wanting to come into our life, though we have so many blockages, so many, all our negative thinking, our negative thoughts about ourselves, all of the heavy crap, pain, layers and layers of darkness, of blockages that we have within ourselves, like, don't allow those miracles to come into our existence. And that's why it's so important to release, to remove, to move those emotions through the body, and really, often I feel like we live in a society that doesn't promote, feeling, like we often want to, shy away from what we feel, or numb what we feel, or we may tell our friends or family members, oh, that was in the past, get over it, or it's not that big of a deal, or whatever thing, right? Instead of really giving ourselves an opportunity to honor what we're feeling, and not only to honor what we're feeling, but giving ourselves permission to lay, if we need to, for 30 minutes, to just sit with that, with those emotions. Like, no one teaches us how to do these things. I wasn't taught anyway. I never knew how to move my emotions through my body. And so I'm learning how to reparent myself. I'm learning how to, give myself grace in these moments, and give myself permission to feel, and not be tyrannical towards myself. Like, oh, we got to get over this now. Like, or that's not that big of a deal. Or why are you feeling like, those are all shameful ways of thinking. Like if you think of your child version of you, would you tell your child version of you, like, that's not that big of a deal, Andy, get over that, that's stupid, why are you thinking about, XYZ, that's silly, no, I mean, maybe then that's how, I know when I was a child, my emotions were invalidated, and that's how my parents reacted to a lot of my emotions. Like, they're not that big of a deal, or I would get reprimanded for feeling. And so essentially that translated into my adult life. And I became essentially my parents, but in my body. So like for a long, long time, I became tyrannical with my own emotions, And so having to learn how to become that parent for ourselves that we always needed and desired. So what does that look like for me? I tell myself that I'm safe, and that it's safe to feel, and that I've done nothing wrong. And, I ask my inner child, what do I need whenever I'm feeling in moments of challenge? And usually I hear whispers, and sometimes it's just, let's rest, or let's cry. And I cry, or I rest. And anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but the point is that in the beginning of sobriety, I didn't have these tools, and it's because I wasn't really actually working with anyone. I stopped going to the rooms of AA, and I was white knuckling it, and it was, excuse my French, and to the point where I contemplated not being on this planet. I romanced how I would essentially eliminate myself. So suicide. I thought I romanced those. Have doing that, to myself, and yeah. So, but again, I was stricken with grace, and I realized that I was the common denominator. I was the common denominator in all of my experiences. And so I started going to the mirror and started doing mirror work. And long story short, this is why my life has transformed, I believe, and I'll just say this one last thing, because I know I said a lot there, and I don't know if any of that made sense, but I think we're often taught in society to hustle and to work hard and to make moves, and let's climb the ladder of success and all of these things outside of us. But I think the real key is to work hard on uncovering the truth of our being, uncovering the truth of who we actually are at our core. And from that space, everything opens up for us. God totally brings us miracles into our lives. The universe opens up to us, and we end up moving and landing to where we're meant to land, essentially, if that makes sense. So,
but as you were talking, it seems like, everyone's had a dysfunctional childhood in some way, some fashion, because, kids don't come with instructions. But, I mentioned that, I like to read a lot of books, and we're going to talk about a book that you're recommending that folks read, but I knew that, some of the things I had to change, that maybe were done to me per se. So my two girls, I'd say God gave me girls for a reason, so they have tender hearts, so I had to be, I'm a warrior by nature. My wife is the nurturer. And so I had to learn to soften my heart when it came to them. So I'd always tell them they were so smart, and they lived up to it. They just like, so, but yeah, you're so smart, whereas maybe when I was a kid, I wasn't told that. I remember my grandfather I broke his, one of his tools, and he just like yelled at me and cussed at me. And I was like, well, your tool is cheap, whatever, but my dad, didn't really defend me, and that kind of stuck. I was like, wait a minute, why didn't you stand up to him? I'm trying to help here. He's not paying me or whatever. But anyway, so I carried that wound for a long time, and just like let it go. It was like, you know what, my grandfather was old school, where it was discipline and hard work. But, I didn't know how to work the tool, or maybe I should have asked, and that kind of thing. So some of it, I have to go back and heal it, because it's like, what, it's not his fault. It was my fault for not asking questions per se, and then learning from those kinds of things. But you mentioned suicide. I work a lot with the veteran community as a volunteer. I mentioned that in my videos with American Legion and the Marine Corps League. And that's one of the issues we're dealing with. The vets, the suicide rate they're saying is 21 a day, but it actually can spike up to 100 a day. And then, the times we're living, even law enforcement and pastors, if you're in a leadership role, head of household, there's that danger. And so, even my daughter, I think when she was with COVID and all that, in her circle, there were like 3 or 4 of her friends that had, either died through overdose or had some kind of suicide situation. So we are dealing with some tough times, and we know that that's not the answer, because, basically looking for the answer is key. Looking for a better life, getting the resources to help is always key. And again, you recommended a book. I forget the title of it now, but it was something
The 4 agreements. Yeah, totally.
The 4 agreements.
Amazing. I just wanted to say though, one thing about the grandpa situation, the parents situation, like there is absolutely zero resentment in my heart for my family. I like to share that part of I had to change my perspective, right? So, and that perspective now is they were doing the best that they could, with what they had. We are out here doing the best that we can with what we know in this here and now moment, which, is part of the 4 agreements. So this is the 5th agreement. I bought this book actually a couple of years ago, and I haven't fully read what the fifth agreement is. I can't find my fourth agreement book, but essentially it's, be impeccable with your word, do the best that you can, and your best might be different from my best. You know what I mean? I mean, we're just at different levels. There's, if you look out into nature's so revealing and such a beautiful teacher. There's so many beautiful, wonderful plants, and they all have their own specific rate of growth, and so we're just out here growing at the rate at which we are meant to grow. You know what I mean? And so we're all out here doing the best that we can, whatever that looks like for you. It's very bio individual, I feel. And let's see, what are the other ones? Don't make any assumptions. That's another one. Like, I feel like oftentimes we get ourselves in trouble with assuming, instead of asking, instead of getting clarity. Maybe you're having a conversation and you're afraid to get clarity. And so then you leave the conversation feeling like, oh my God, that person didn't like me, or that person thinks this about me, or that person da 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 da. And then we spend so much energy on like those thoughts, instead of having just maybe asked for more clarity. Or also too, I feel like when we assume and we have negative assumptions about whatever we experience, that can be a mirror for how we actually feel about ourselves, and so it can actually be a beautiful teacher. So anyway, so be impeccable with your word, do the best that you can, don't make any assumptions, and also don't take anything personal. Because I think before we started this call, we were talking about your daughter and how, she works in a service industry, and how, oftentimes there can be some that she really enjoys it, but sometimes there's some challenging humans that come in there. And so I just shared that, most humans are wounded, unfortunately, and they're not doing anything about their internal worlds to heal their inner worlds, to change their perspectives. And so they're out there in the world projecting their mind onto other humans. And so it's important for us to remember that in challenging experiences, and not react, and just trust that they're going through their journey. Like when people are challenging towards us, like, or mean or rude or whatever, like really not taking that personal, and remembering that everybody out here is on their path and on their journey. It doesn't make it okay, right? But I think it's far more freeing and liberating when we can have that thought process versus I did something wrong, or something's wrong with me, or I'm not doing my job right, or, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. You know what I mean? Like, it's far more liberating when we can shift our minds into believing like, okay, they're on their path, and God knows what's happening in their worlds. But it's not a reflection of who I am. It has nothing to do with me, and everything to do with where they're at in their lives, So anyway, the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, wonderful book, definitely highly recommend.
Well, even as you're talking, I'm thinking about training them in boot camp in the Marines. The drill instructors, one of the first things they taught us is never assume, because you make an ass out of you and me. So that was a principle. You can't assume anything, because you've got to report to your higher ups and to your team. And if you assume you made a mistake, I mean, it could actually cost someone their life. Being true to your word is important. Marines counting on another Marine, being the best, at whatever your job is. And then, of course, understanding the, don't take it personal. So at some point, the drill instructors would yell at you, whatever, but you know what? Let it roll off. They had names for you, right? And he's like, okay, they're not really talking at me. They're just talking through me, making sure that I'm getting the instruction and, doing what I'm supposed to do. Right.
And
you just had to learn to be humble in that situation.
It's very challenging to not take things personally when you haven't done any of this inner work to even like witness what your triggers are or what your wounds are. Because if you are completely unaware, you hear someone tell you, oh, don't take that personal. It's difficult for a human being not to take that personal, because they haven't done the work to unravel all of that's within them, to understand like, oh, like, for example, recently I made a mistake at work and an email was sent about it to the whole department. And I started to take it personal. And it's because as a child, I worked really hard at doing everything right. I worked so hard to do all of the things, like be in all of the programs and bring the good grades and be the good girl. And then the one thing I would do wrong, I would get reprimanded for. So I wouldn't get praised for all the good, but my parents would certainly note the one thing that I did wrong. And so this email, what it triggered in me was essentially this childhood dynamic that I had. So I have awareness though, I realize like, oh, this email, it's not personal. I've done nothing wrong. Like I'm not, who knows, maybe no one told me, Mayra, you did a mistake. Like I actually assumed that it's, that it was my fault. Right. And so, and that all of those assumptions and taking all of that personal it has nothing to do with the experience that just came up. It has everything to do with my childhood experiences and like what those dynamics brought up within me when, when I wouldn't get praised for all the good. And it felt like I would only get reprimanded for the one thing I wouldn't do right, and so it felt very defeating and like, I wasn't good enough and nothing I ever did was, ever going to be, good and yada, yada. And so it brought up some of those emotions within me, but I was able to, in the past without having that awareness, it makes it really challenging to let it go. You know what I mean? Because you're not aware that you even have these wounds or these triggers, you know what I mean? And so I worked through these emotions yesterday. I did a couple meditations, I did some breath work, and I spoke to my inner child, and I was able to get through and remember that, it's I work in an environment where everybody's entitled to, express themselves and reminding myself I didn't do anything wrong and that I'm doing the best that I can, and so anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially, if you're not actively working on your inner world, when you hear, don't take it personal, it can be a lot harder to understand what that even means. And so I think it's important to begin to unpack our inner worlds and our triggers, our wounds, etc., to even begin to understand what that statement even means. Anyway, that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, so I mean, you make a good point. And there was a book I read, I mentioned in my last video, called Managing Oneself. So once you understand what your strengths are, ultimately you can bring to the table those strengths. And if you're weak in a certain area, you don't need to concentrate necessarily in that area. Focus on your strengths. You've heard that before. And then whatever you're going to do, do it well, but let people know how you work, so that way they know what your strengths are and what you're bringing to the table, and then you're focusing on the result that you're gonna accomplish with that strength. But we made mention that this last year I made some changes in reading books, and one of them was basically taking responsibility. A lot of successful folks, basically they come from it at an angle that it's my fault. And so if there's a problem, then that focuses them to figure out, okay, how do I, solve that problem so we don't have that problem again? So by taking responsibility for the circumstance, you're not necessarily internalizing it. You're just saying, okay, if it was my fault, what do I do to make sure this doesn't happen again? So that way you're running late 20 minutes. Well, if you had left 30 minutes earlier, you wouldn't be late 20 minutes. So it's kind of that kind of dynamic, to avoid the same situation in the future. You just make some changes, right? And, enjoy the ride. I made mention that I'm reading one book that was recommended to me a couple of years ago. I finally picked it up and I'm over halfway through it, called The 48 Laws of Power. But as we're talking, each one of the laws, basically you're interacting with people. And there's some historical examples interacting with the king, because it's never the king's fault, and if you one of the first rules is never outshine the king. So knowing that, so okay, the king's temperament, so don't go looking for a fight, because he will have you banished or he'll have you executed, right? And so the king is going to protect his majesty, and so your job as a courtier is to make sure the king is the king, and everybody else that's operating under the kingdom understands that, and they navigate with those parameters, right? So to keep yourself out of trouble, basically. So anyway, that's one book that I'm reading. I'm reading another one right now, 13 Hours in Benghazi. Mark Geist sent me a signed copy. Oz is his name, and my tagline is "On Mission." So I got him to sign "Stay on Mission." You've got a mission, Mayra. I think you've helped a lot of people with being so open, with navigating who Mayra is, and letting the folks know that Mayra's a good person. She's got a lot of interests, and she's sharing her world. And I think you're helping people to have the freedom to do the same. And it's we've been wanting to do the Zoom call for a while. And but basically I hadn't been doing my YouTube channel for a while to this year. But once I got to going, I said, I got to have Mayra on to kind of share her story and her journey, and kind of go from there. So how can people follow you? And you've got a podcast called Chiron and Gemini. Tell us a little bit about it, how people can follow it.
Yeah, so Chiron and Gemini, it's on Spotify and iTunes. It's all about my healing the mind, the body, the soul journey. And so I just have transparent conversations with people that have had transformative experiences, and also have conversations with people that are into the alternative medicine, into alternative medicine and alternative healing modalities. So right now I've just kind of taken a pause from recording, but I will be recording season 2 here shortly, and putting that out there. So stay tuned for that. So it's Chiron, Chiron in Gemini. So I was sharing with you that I was working with an astrologer a couple of years ago for about a year, and we came across my Chiron placement. And so if you've never done an astrology reading before, essentially you need your birth date, the time of your birth, and where you were born. And so you put this into a calculator, and it essentially yields a snapshot of the sky, and it tells you where each planet was at the date and time and location of your birth. And so, which is apparently very telling of who you could be, what your wounds in this lifetime may be, etc. And so anyway, Chiron is a wounded warrior healer. That's what Chiron represents. And so it's in my sign of Gemini, which Gemini is all about communication and intellect and, inner child and play and joy, etc. And so what I came to realize through my astrology sessions with my astrologer was that, these sessions really were telling to me, because I did feel like in my early 20s, late 20s, even early 30s, I felt that it was really difficult for me to express myself, and everything that I would express or share, I felt very doubtful about, like, who am I? What am I doing? That was silly. That was stupid. Why'd you say that? Oh my, constantly questioning everything that I would share. And so really that brings its own suffering with it, constantly in the mind thinking like, oh my God, why did I say that? Why did I do that? The mind just going crazy. And so when I had these sessions with her, I realized I was able to witness that was actually how I, felt essentially with my expressing. And so I decided that a way to heal that was through starting a podcast and just putting myself out there and expressing my whole experience, and just trusting that whatever I shared was meant to be shared, and really now I do my best to live my life in trust and from a place of heart. So the mind is so useful, but when the mind uses us, it can be challenging. Instead, the mind is meant to be a tool, I believe. And oftentimes it gets in the way of what the heart knows to be true. And so with all of the uncovering and all of the unveiling that I've done and purification process that I've gone through, mind, body, and soul, I've gotten far more into my heart. And I just, I've gotten a lot better at tapping in, feeling in, and I make my decisions from my heart these days, to the best of my ability. Of course, I still fail, I still fall, but it's okay. It's not, this is why I love yoga so much. We didn't even go into yoga, but that's totally okay. Yoga is not about the pose. It's not about the doing. It's about the being. How are we being in our poses, quote unquote? You can translate pose to, outside into the world. Like, how are you being in your challenging experiences or not so challenging experiences? That is yoga. Yoga is how we are being, not what we are doing. And so anyway, I lost my train of thought, but Chiron and Gemini, I started it to heal this inability that I perceived in my mind. I perceived myself incapable of expressing myself, in a concise or cohesive, what's the right word? in a clear way. Like I really believe that I was incapable of doing that. And so the podcast has given me the space to just freely share, express, and trust that all is well, and whatever is shared is meant to be shared, and whomever is meant to listen, it was meant to listen, and so anyway, I'm excited to get back into recording. I have some really awesome people I'm going to be interviewing. And so talking too much here, but I'm also on Instagram at Mayra J Leal, Mayra JLEAL. And then you can also find me on Facebook, but I don't really use Facebook. So yeah, that's where peeps can find me.
We were echoing some quote from Bruce Lee. He was talking about martial arts being a way to express yourself, what your body can do, and being in that, that zone, so to speak. But even as you were talking about the mind, I read a book a while back called The Ant and the Elephant. Our conscious mind is the ant. The elephant is the subconscious. And so as you start to change, who you are, like right now I'm praying, I've gone through some changes of reading different, leadership styles, whatever. And I'm asking the Lord, like, teach me to be kingly, and to be kingly means you have to be aware of your kingdom and the people in your kingdom and the rules and regulations of the kingdom, and to operate from a position of power and authority, but not necessarily be a tyrannical king, right? So there's good and bad, and there's balance, right, in your life. And it sounds like, with the podcast you're doing, you're teaching people how to find out who they are, and then how to operate in their giftings, their emotions, and I think, there's hints, that are in your personality that, again, going back to your strengths, what you're good at. Well, then once you know that, then you can really refine it and improve in that area. And if you're weak in a certain area, you can even improve some of the weak areas per se, but your strengths are probably going to have the most impact. But anyway, thank you for being a part of this Zoom call. I guess I'm calling it episode 17, The Beauty and the Beast, Living Your Best Life. Because even if you're a beast, you can live a good life too, But any parting words that you want to say?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking, one of the things that recently came through for me, I was out in nature. I was on a layover. And I guess I didn't even really share. I'm a private flight attendant. I work for a family in Indianapolis, and I travel a ton. And so anyway, I always do the unconventional thing on all of my layovers. I don't really go eat at fancy restaurants or go drinking. I find the things that, are in alignment with my soul. And I love hiking, and I love being in nature. And so I was on a little nature walk, and I got this message that there really are only two paths. There's the path of fear, path of lack, of scarcity, of doubt, of insecurity. There's that path in making decisions from that place. So, a king, for example, that's tyrannical is probably making decisions from a place of fear, of wanting to keep that power, of being greedy, of needing to be in that position of power because needs to be validated, needs to feel worthy because perhaps there's some wounding there of not feeling seen, heard, loved, or cared for. And so, now in this position of power but abusing it and leading from a place of fear rather than leading from a place of love, of trust, of surrender, of faith, of knowing, of heart-centeredness, And so if there's anything that I could leave anybody with is if ever you're, in a state of confusion or uncertain about making a decision, ask yourself, like, what is the path of love here? Like, or, yes. So what is the path? Is this the path of love? Or is this decision from a place of love? Or is this decision from a place of fear? Essentially, that's what when I'm stuck between, when I'm stuck in indecision, for example, I ask myself that question, and it's really revealing. And so my wish, I really truly believe that if we could heal our inner worlds, if we could tend to our inner worlds, if we could, and health, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, it's multidimensional. It's multifaceted, and it's all interconnected. And if you just focus on your physical health, but don't focus on the other, it's sure you're maybe physically healthy, but all of the other, the emotional health and the spiritual health and the mental health, that's all also equally as important as the physical health. And so I really believe that if we as human beings could tend to our inner world and heal all of those, harmonize all of those areas of our lives, we would show up in the world as far more blissful, happier, free human beings that are lighter, that are willing to give from a place of love, that are making decisions from a place of love, that are in trust, that are in surrender, that are allowing God to essentially work through them, versus what we're currently seeing in the world, which I believe we're in a time where we're moving or living from a place of fear and not trusting in the divine, and not trusting in God's grace and God's love. And so, yeah, if there's anything I could leave anybody with, is lead from a place of love. Love truly heals. And one last thing, love, care, and presence is what we need to heal ourselves and others. Love, care, and presence. And that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Mayra, for being a part of this. As I mentioned, the one thing, this was the most important thing I could do today, was to do this Zoom call and to get this out to the folks, so I think it was a good time shared. And thank you so much for being so open. And anyway, keep us when your Zoom call, when your podcast is back online, we'll be tuning in.
Totally. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, truly, for your time and for providing this beautiful space.
Awesome. Again, my name is Andy Valdez. You've been watching Marketing Dynamics Behind the Scenes, and we thank you so much for watching. Take care.